Welcome to the Finely Tuned Infrastructure Podcast by Rhythmic Technologies. We're jumping straight into a crucial question for modern businesses today. When does moving your infrastructure to the cloud really make sense? And maybe more importantly, what's the smart way to actually do it?
Yeah, and this is all based on our recent blog post, which kind of lays out our thinking on this.
Exactly.
And the core argument we make there is, well, pretty clear. For most businesses, the cloud should really be your automatic first thought, your default starting point.
Right. Not just a maybe.
No, exactly. It's not just about following a trend. It's tapping into, inherent advantages, like being able to scale up or down instantly.
Yeah, no flexibility.
Huge flexibility, yeah. And getting access to this massive, constantly growing toolkit of advanced services without building it yourself.
Makes sense. Now, you do hear about companies sometimes moving off the cloud. We mentioned Basecamp in the post, didn't we?
We did, and it's important context, but those cases are often, quite specific exceptions, really.
So not the rule.
Definitely not the rule for the vast majority. For most, a well-thought-out cloud strategy is still the smartest way forward.
Okay, so we're trying to cut through some of that noise today, help you make those good decisions.
Let's dig into that idea then, the cloud as the starting point. Our blog post really hammers this home. It's not a 50-50 choice with on-prem anymore.
Why is that the default thinking now?
Well, think about it. Dynamically adjusting resources. Scaling up for a big launch, down during quiet times, that's built in.
Global reach too, right? Without building data centers everywhere.
Absolutely. And those managed services, databases, machine learning tools, whatever you need, they take a huge operational load off your team. For most businesses, that combination is just incredibly powerful.
Okay, but the blog post does mention scenarios where on-prem could still be on the table.
It does.
Yeah.
But they're pretty niche. Imagine you have these really, really predictable workloads.
Like always running at max capacity.
Exactly. High performance, constant maximum throughput needed. And critically, you also need the big capital budget for the hardware and a specialized team just focused on tuning that specific setup.
Which isn't most companies.
Not at all. And going back to that Basecamp example we used in the post, it's vital to see why they made that choice, as we laid out.
It was about their HEY email service. Very stable usage patterns.
Precisely. Remarkably stable, predictable. It's really not a signal for, the average business to suddenly ditch their cloud plans, a specific case study.
Got it. Okay, let's switch gears to something that's always top of mind. Security.
Ah, yes, the big one.
There's still this lingering worry for some, isn't there, that the cloud is somehow inherently riskier than your own locked server room.
Yeah, that perception persists. But our blog post tackles it directly. The reality is major cloud providers have invested, astronomical sums into security.
Meeting really tough standards.
Exactly. Think HIPAA for healthcare data, PCI DSS for payment cards. The blog mentioned those as examples. They have compliance-ready environments built in.
And the tools are there too, like encryption, access controls.
A whole arsenal. Powerful encryption options, fine-grained access management, detailed audit logging. The foundation is incredibly strong.
Okay, but here's a key point from the post, especially relevant maybe for smaller outfits.
Go on.
When things do go wrong security-wise in the cloud, it's often not the platform itself that failed, right?
That's spot on. It usually boils down to how things were set up, misconfigurations, or maybe just lacking the in-house expertise to use those powerful security tools correctly.
So the blog called it a design and expertise issue, not really a cloud flaw.
Precisely. That's the distinction. With proper planning, solid processes, and the right skills, whether internal or external, the cloud can absolutely be as secure, often even more secure, than a traditional setup.
Because these providers have huge security teams.
Way bigger and more specialized than most individual companies could ever afford. That's their core business.
Right. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk money then, costs.
Always a fun topic.
We've all heard the horror stories, right? Cloud bills suddenly skyrocketing. The blog post acknowledges this reality.
It does. Things like over-provisioning resources, paying for more compute power than you actually use.
Or forgetting to turn things off. Idle resources just racking up charges.
Yep, that happens. And data transfer costs can sometimes surprise people, too. They add up.
And the post noted that smaller companies, tighter budgets, can really feel that pinch if costs aren't watched.
For sure. But here's the crucial takeaway from the post. Spiraling costs are usually, almost always, a sign of poor management, lack of oversight. It's not an inherent flaw in the cloud's pricing model itself.
It's about how you use it.
Exactly.
Right.
So the blog post pivots to, okay, how do you manage this? It talks about leveraging auto-scaling effectively.
So resources adjust automatically to demand.
Right. Monitoring your usage closely and just consistently following established best practices for cloud cost optimization. It takes discipline.
And the conclusion was, if you do that, cloud spending becomes much more predictable.
And often genuinely more cost-effective in the long run compared to the whole cycle of buying, maintaining, powering, cooling, and eventually replacing physical hardware.
That leads us nicely into the concept of TCO, total cost of ownership. The blog post really stressed using TCO analysis.
Yeah, because it forces you to look at the bigger picture beyond just that monthly cloud bill. It reveals the true economics.
So what kind of things does that TCO include, according to the post?
Okay, so first up, data transfer costs. The post flagged these as potentially 5 to 15% of your bill. Need to plan for that.
Okay, what else?
Then there's staff training, getting your engineers skilled up on cloud tech. The post estimated, $5,000 to $10,000 per engineer?
Which, as the post noted, can feel like a big hurdle for smaller firms.
Understandably. Integration costs, too, getting existing systems to talk to the cloud bills. The post suggested maybe 10–20% of your migration budget.
Seems like a lot up front.
It can be. But then you weigh it against opportunity costs. The blog highlighted the ability to innovate faster, scale more quickly because the infrastructure isn't the bottleneck.
Harder to put a number on that one.
Much harder, but the impact can be massive. And don't forget hardware refreshes. On-prem means big capital expense every, say, 3 to 5 years.
The cloud eliminates that entirely.
Pretty much. So the blog's advice is run the numbers, do 3-year and 5-year TCO models, factor in your expected growth.
And the conclusion for most?
For most, the flexibility and the lower day-to-day operational overhead of the cloud win out over those initial costs. And for smaller businesses, that training investment. It pays back in agility and avoiding those big CapEx hits later.
Makes sense. What about different industries? Does it apply across the board? The blog suggested it does.
Yeah, it's remarkably broad. The posts give examples like manufacturers using IoT data,
Banks with heavy regulations,
retailers needing to handle massive seasonal peaks, even government agencies trying to stretch budgets. There are cloud solutions tailored for all of them.
even for those highly regulated industries. The compliance piece is solid enough.
Generally, yes. Thanks to those compliance-ready offerings we mentioned earlier, the providers have done a lot of work there.
Okay. What about hybrid setups? Mixing cloud and on-prem? The blog post had a view on that, right?
It did. Basically, that hybrid should be the deliberate exception, not the default starting point.
Only use it if you absolutely have to.
Pretty much. If specific regulations mandate keeping certain data on-prem, or you have truly immovable legacy systems, otherwise, aim for cloud native if you can.
All right, so we've covered the when and why. Let's get practical, the how. The blog post laid out some key steps, right? Even before migrating.
Foundational stuff, yeah. Having a clear governance framework, who owns what are the rules.
Making sure the team has the skills or a plan to get them.
Absolutely. Building in security from day one, a security-first mindset.
Yeah.
Having good ways to track costs right from the start.
And the advice for smaller shops was to start lean, focus on security and cost tracking first.
Exactly. Don't try to boil the ocean. Get the essentials right.
Okay, then the actual migration. The post recommended a phased approach.
Definitely. Don't just lift and shift everything at once unless you have a very good reason. First, assess your workloads. Which ones are good cloud candidates?
Then prioritize. Find those quick wins the blog mentioned.
Right. Applications or services where you'll see clear benefits fast. It builds momentum and confidence. Then roll things out phase by phase.
Especially important for smaller teams, keeps risk manageable.
Totally. Reduces the blast radius if something goes wrong.
Okay, so you're in the cloud, job done, the blog post says, not quite.
No. That's when the ongoing work starts. Optimization and operations are key.
On the cost side, the blog mentioned things like right-sizing.
Yeah, making sure your virtual machines or databases aren't way bigger than they need to be. And using reserve instances or savings plans for predictable workloads.
The post mentioned that 80-155 rule and potential savings.
Yeah, the idea that maybe 80% of your spend is steady, 15% variable, 5% unpredictable. Targeting that 80% with reservations can save like 40–60% according to the post. Big savings there.
And performance. Monitoring, auto-scaling.
Crucial. Keeping an eye on how things are running, automatically scaling resources to handle load changes smoothly, and continuous compliance checks are vital too.
The post-mentioned provider tools can help here, even for smaller firms, like AWS Cost Explorer.
Yeah, the providers offer a lot of tools, many free, to help with monitoring and cost management. You don't always need expensive third-party software to get started.
Good point. Let's talk risk mitigation. The blog covered that too.
Yep. Basic stuff like deploying across multiple availability zones within a region.
So if one data center has an issue, you stay up.
Exactly. Using layered security defense in depth. Carefully checking vendor service level agreements, SLAs. What are they actually promising?
And for really critical stuff, maybe even multi-cloud failover.
It's an option the post mentioned, yeah. Having a plan B in a different cloud provider's environment. Complex, but might be needed for some.
But the post also mentioned the crazy reliability of some services, like S3's 11.9's durability.
Right. The underlying infrastructure is incredibly resilient. But that doesn't mean you skip planning. You still need smart architecture and mitigation strategies. Don't rely just on the provider's resilience.
Okay, now something maybe less technical but just as important. The human element. The blog post stressed this.
Hugely important. Investing in training your people. The post suggested aiming for certifications, maybe within 6 months, on architecture, security.
Managing the change process, too. It can be disruptive.
Definitely. The post suggested things like pairing traditional IT folks with cloud teams, celebrating those early wins publicly to build buy-in.
And dealing with resistance, because there often is some.
Yeah, the blog suggested creating internal cloud champions who are enthusiastic, using that paired migration approach so people learn together, and crucially, demonstrating wins that matter to different parts of the business.
Not just tech wins, but business wins.
Exactly. And again, for smaller companies, those champions and free provider training resources can make a real difference.
Finally, the blog looked a bit ahead, didn't it? Emerging tech.
Yeah, how things like serverless can amplify the cloud's value.
The post mentioned big cost savings there, like 60–80% for intermittent tasks.
Potentially, yeah, because you only pay when the code is actually running.
Yeah.
Also, edge computing processing data closer to where it's generated, like for IoT.
Faster insights.
Right. And AI ops, using AI to help automate operations, like scaling decisions or spotting anomalies. These aren't sci-fi anymore. They're tools that can really boost efficiency, even for leaner teams.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. The core message from the blog post seems pretty consistent.
I think so. It's that the cloud really should be the default strategic choice now.
And going on premises. That requires a really specific, strong justification. It's the exception.
Exactly. And success isn't just being in the cloud. It's about using it skillfully, developing the expertise, the processes, using it as a powerful tool.
Right. As the blog post put it, the future isn't really about being in or out of the cloud.
It's about using it wisely to achieve your business goals.
Makes perfect sense. So, just a quick heads up for everyone listening, this discussion was actually AI generated.
That's right.
For the original blog post content and lots more insights, definitely check out rhythmictech.com.